Good evening. I'm Peter Stothard, editor of the Times Literary Supplement, one of the many papers that Christopher has graced and... no, we've never disgraced the TLS, no. He's graced and disgraced... No, only graced us.
We'll take another run at saying that. Fine introducer, you say.
Yeah. Well, the last, I always remember the last time I saw Christopher at Hay, we were just discussing this. He was sort of standing sort of there, sitting there. And on this stage here was a very pleased with himself, self-satisfied former president of the United States. And I was sitting up there with a pretty good view. And as the former president got to a particularly unacceptable part of his foreign policy address, there was a slow rising about there as Christopher gradually and painfully and slowly and very visibly walked out. So if anybody comes in late, called Bill and looking aggressive and difficult, it's best if you put him at the end of the row. This is the first outing for Christopher's extraordinary memoir of a part of his life. Not all the parts of his life, but many parts of his life. Hitch 22. It's great that it's doing it first at Hay. Bill Clinton was a big part of the kind of world of Oxford where he and I first met and where you met a lot of the characters in this book. And I think we'll start with Oxford. Bill Clinton, Martin Amis, James Fenton. Oxford made the man or not?
I don't think it made Bill Clinton. I left that night because I couldn't stand the way that he dodged his responsibility for not just at first ignoring the genocide in Rwanda, but later on supporting the French intervention in Rwanda, which was on the side of those who had committed the genocide. That still doesn't stand to his charge. It should do. In general, I couldn't stand the sight of him. I remember how serious and how brave and how committed the young Americans were at Oxford when I was there, the young Rhodes Scholars mainly, who were in the terrible position of having to be ambassadors for their country, scholarly ambassadors, at a time when their country was committing an unjust war in Indochina and was repressing the demand of civil rights at home, and how squarely they all faced it, and how sinuously Bill Clinton dodged between the raindrops of all that. Martin Walker, who was a contemporary of ours, also who became Bill's biographer, his book in America is called Bill Clinton, The President We Deserve. The English edition is called Bill Clinton, The President They Deserve. Again, very deft piece of publishing by Martin. Swears that I was present. I don't remember it particularly. The moment when Clinton didn't inhale, which for those of you who don't know, is the moment when, because he's allergic to smoke and doesn't inhale anyway, when he would cram marijuana into himself by way of brownies and cookies. He's never inhaled. So when I later heard his claim, I tried it, but I didn't inhale, I laughed louder than most people because everyone knew he was lying, but I knew why he was lying, and even how. So in general, it was a good thing being at Oxford because you could see the quality of the people who wanted to be one day Prime Minister or President. And you think, well, if ever they make it, I'll be able to say I knew them when. Surely some mistake has been made. And also because at the Oxford Union and other places, or at the Labour Club, you could invite the members of the government to come, and they would. And you could find out that they hardly knew, no, I was about to use a vulgar expression, that they didn't know much more than you did. It was a confidence-building experience.
Yeah, and indeed, the first time I think I ever set eyes on you was at the Oxford Union when there was the noose was famously hung down over Michael Stewart in the Vietnam
yes,
protesting.
I say in my book I'm a bit embarrassed about that now because I think above all things I'm in favor of free expression and free speech and unfettered debate, and it was probably wrong of us, and it was my idea that after the invasion of Cambodia, an extension of an already terrible war, and the shooting of 4 unarmed students at Kent State University in Ohio, and, which is always forgotten, 4 unarmed black students at Jackson State in Mississippi. We thought an ordinary everyday protest wouldn't quite meet the case. We thought we should tell the Foreign Secretary that he was a war criminal and a murderer, and sort of suit the action to the word. So we even dropped a noose from the gallery of the Union and shut the debate down, hoping, I think, this is what I say in my book, that word of this would get to the people of Indochina and they'd feel somehow encouraged that a load of rubbish students of a Brideshead regurgitated generation really cared about them. Look, it seemed important at the time, and I had a huge quarrel with Jack Straw about it, who was then head of the National Union of Students, who said, "You've really messed up. The free expression is what people care about and should care about the most. That comes first."
Yeah. But this was a time which particularly students today have to be kind of focused on, because that sort of dinner jacket and donkey jacket life that you were living at this time, protesting, at Cowley Works during the day and then sort of eating and drinking with Isaiah Berlin at night, as it were, is not something, I think, it was pretty unique to that period.
Yeah, well, I'd had a rather limited upbringing and a rather Spartan education in a monastic boys' school, and I thought, if I'm going to go to Oxford, I'm certainly going to carry on being a socialist and an ally of the working class and all that. But there's no reason to be miserable on top. I mean, it's tough enough being a socialist and an ally of the working class. And if John Sparrow says, "Come to dinner at All Souls," go to dinner at All Souls. Maybe it's true what they say about the china, the silver, the wine, and so forth. It collided, though, as I had to describe in my book, when I was giving a rabble-rousing speech with some success, and I saw the villainous figure of the cynical figure of Warden Sparrow cleaving through the crowd towards me, and everyone falling back, like Moses parting the Red Sea. He was the most hated figure at Oxford at the time. And he came up and said, "My dear Christopher, I'm awfully sorry to have missed your speech. I'm sure it was quite admirable, but I just wanted to remind you had promised to look in after dinner tonight." And I heard the cocks crowing. I could have pretended I didn't, "I know thee not, old man, fall to thy prayers." I couldn't do it. I said, "No, see you later." I think rather admirably. Muted applause for that.
Yes. I don't think we can leave.
So the whole book is about trying to have a double life or 2 lives without being a hypocrite, or without being a schizophrenic, or without being a sellout. I mean, Scott Fitzgerald says somewhere that the test of a serious person is whether they can live with contradictions or not, and everyone does, whether they admit it or not. The first thing is to admit that you are doing so. And that can be educational. In fact, in those days, I would have said it was dialectical. Yes.
Okay, let's reel back then. So before Oxford, there was quite a good example of the dialectical, and the description of your parents in this book is something which a lot of people didn't know before. We know your arguments, we know what you stand for, we know the consistencies, we know a lot about your thought, but we didn't know where, as it were, you came from. So I think since this is an autobiography, we should say something just now, just describing the differences between your parents, because that clearly played some part in this.
Well, without my parents, I wouldn't have been to any university or had any education at all, because they hadn't had any. No Hitchens had been to a university before, or let alone to a private school. And for them, it was the ticket out of being military family. They both served in the Navy in the war, come out of the slum, sort of moved up a bit through the armed forces.